Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto is teaching in this book, The Path of the Just, about a concept of elevating yourself to the highest level of righteousness. He says that a person, no matter who you are, can become a tzaddik. A tzaddik is a person who is really righteous. He says this tzaddik is a person who not only does what is required by Torah, by the laws of God, but exceeds them in every aspect of their life. Talks about doing it with watchfulness and zeal and care, attention to detail. And then we get toward the end of the book and he's saying, humility is something that can be grasped, but it is something that must be worked on gradually. There are two concepts, he says, to acquire biblical humility. One is through training and the other through contemplation. The training aspect of humility means that you start easy, achieve little things at a time. We talked about humility and the practice of humility by simply preferring others above yourself. Very simple concept. But this translates into your daily life, what you do at the store, how you operate your car in the traffic. All of these things are characters of humility in which you always prefer the other person over yourself. When it comes to being in places of honor, a person who is practicing or training themselves in humility will intentionally, even though they deserve a place of honor, will lower the expectation. One of the great stories that we like to hear is about the elderly man who is seen at the shul, and after the shul, the rabbi invites him to his house to have dinner with him. And at the dinner, the rabbi asked him, would you like to do a shiur, a lecture on a part of the portion? He said, well, certainly I will. And he does a lecture, but he gives no credit to where the lecture comes from. The rabbi gets a bit upset. He says, if he does it again, I'm going to tell him that he should. Because in Judaism, we know that when you cite a source or give a lecture on something from Torah, you always tell where you heard it from. Even if you didn't hear it from Rabbi Nachman himself, but I heard it from Rabbi Greenbaum or a friend, you always give credit to that because it's a mitzvah. It's an act of great respect to the teacher. And so the next time he teaches, does the same thing, does the whole shiur, almost word for word. The rabbi says, you know what, I've had enough of this. I'm going to tell him. Picks the book out of the shelf, opens it up. He says, this is word for word in this book right here. Word for word. You stole it out of it and didn't give the author credit. He goes, I'd look better on paper, don't I? The author was the guy who was given the shiur. He's so humble that he didn't say, oh, in my book, I wrote this. He didn't say it. So this is what we're talking about. Last week, the first three paragraphs, we were looking at an analogy that the Ramchal gives of Israel being like a tree, and that all through a time, starting from Adam forward, there are these different stages of the growth of that tree. There is the root section, which runs up to Noah's time, Babylonian time, and then the trunk, and then the branches. And from Abraham being like the trunk, and then from Abraham you have the 600,000 branches that branch out from there, which are the Jews that end up standing at Mount Sinai. And from the 600,000 branches are other branches and huge blossoms of great growth on this tree, which is the Jewish people. Along with that, we learn that there are individuals as well as other nations and people types that are part of this forest that is described by the Ramchal. So there's the Jewish tree that's there, and then you have all the branches. And then you're going to have those within the nations that grow up. They started from the root section. They started around the Babylonian time. They grew a tree trunk, and they have the branches. These nations are the Asiatic people. They're the European people, etc., etc. But in this part of the book, it's interesting what the Ramchal shows, and it's right up our alley, what we generally talk about quite often, and that is the non-Jews' ability to connect themselves to the nation of Israel. And paragraph 4 on page 139, he says, God's great love and goodness decreed that the branches of the other nations still be given the chance, If they so desired, they still had the free choice to tear themselves loose from their own roots and through their own actions include themselves among the branches of Abraham's family. Now, in the previous paragraph, he talks about how though these other people, groups, and individuals within the nations, though they are a part of a separate tree, it's a different kind of tree. It's not the Jewish tree. It's not a tree that's going to be cut down and thrown away. It's a tree, though, that has a different purpose in the world. You understand? It's a difference between having a lemon tree and, say, an oak tree. They both are very important to growth, but one's for building and the other one's for eating and having nurturing capabilities. So Israel, being its own root and its tree and its branches, it has its responsibility in the world to become an example of great life and light. While the nations, they grow up, and as individuals, we are made up of different types of trees. Now, let me just find out in this room, and I know on the internet we would have many thousands more, but we have people that are from Spanish descent, correct? Help me out here. People from European descent, right? Huh? Polish, yes. Anybody else we miss? South American, that's Spanish? Or actually Italian, right? Your family's? No, your family is from Spain. Okay, Spain. Russia, Brazil, right. So you see, these are like different trees, but as the Ramchal is now saying, it's up to the individual in God's loving kindness and mercy for an individual to rip himself out of his own culture and thinking and implant himself almost, I hate to use this word because it's used elsewhere, but almost engrafting yourself into the root of Judaism. Now that would be an actual conversion. That would be an actual person who's becoming a convert. Had this discussion, I forgot with who in the last 24 hours. It may have been with you. But most people don't understand the secret power of conversion. Now, what do I mean by that? Most people, when you think conversion, you think, especially Christians, they go from Catholic to converting to be Christian. Now they convert to be a Baptist, to convert to be a Pentecostal. So they go through all kinds of different conversions in their life. You have a person who might be Buddhist who decides to become a Christian, so he converts to Christianity. And it's conversion to a religious system or a religious thought process. In Judaism, you are actually, it's more than just conversion. You are actually becoming a citizen of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. You're actually breaking your branch off of who you were culturally, your identity, how you think, how you talk, how you act, what you eat. Everything is changed, and when you plug into the Jewish tree, you begin to pull the sap and the source from that tree. Any branch that is grafted into the tree doesn't take on the nature of the branch. The branch takes on the nature of the tree, correct? Does it make sense? So if you plug in a tangerine into a branch into another citrus-bearing plant, then what comes out is a sort of a hybrid, but it gets its source and it ends up taking on the nature of the tree itself. It's an important concept. This is what God meant when He told Avraham Avinu in Bereshit 12:3. He says, all the families of the earth will be blessed through you. Abraham was thus made the father of all the converts. Everybody in the nations that come, he's the father. That's why that they name an individual who converts to Judaism, Yaakov ben Avraham, or Sarah bat Rachel or Sarah. It's interesting. This is, however, would require effort on the part of individuals concerned. Without such effort, they would remain attached to their own roots and retain their own natural characteristics. Now, the question that would come, should be asked at this point, is if a person from the nations, or can a person from the nations, not necessarily graft themselves and become Jewish. They don't want to convert to Judaism. They don't want to take on the full responsibility of the nature and characteristics as a convert, But can they come close and can they enjoy the fruit of Judaism and its wisdom? Absolutely, 100%. It's true. How would I say that is brought down in the concepts of horticulture? It's interesting that certain plants do very well being planted next to another plant. For example, a flowering plant is a very good plant to accompany a fruit tree, right? Because they attract bees, they're pretty, beautiful. So there is the ability for you as an individual to draw near to the tree of life in Judaism and enjoy the great benefits of being close to it. That's why the B'nai Noach is encouraged to study Torah and study Jewish concepts and ethics so they can begin to understand and download some of the great wisdom that is there for their own life without the necessity of converting. Judaism does not require an individual, obviously we know, to convert. It is also necessary, as paragraph 5, is also necessary to realize that each individual tree is also divided, very much as the descendants of Adam were divided into root, tree, and branches. Primary branches can thus be distinguished in each individual tree, and these branches are then differentiated to yield their particular members. It says Abraham's tree consisted of 600,000 main branches. These are the individuals who left Egypt, and it was to them that the Torah was given the land of Israel divided. Every Jew subsequently born is considered to be an element and a descendant of one of those primary branches. We have people that are for example, that are Cohens. They know they're Cohens. It's been passed down from generation to generation. That's their branch. It was the 600,000 original Jews that the Torah was given. When this occurred, the tree was said to have attained maturity. So at Mount Sinai is when the tree became its full maturity. It began to bear beautiful fruit. Most fruit trees take 3 to 6 years, is that correct, to bear fruit? I have a lovely lemon tree that is in the backyard that we're getting ready to plant this spring, and this will be its 4th year, right? So we're kind of anticipating the maturity of that tree. And it's a dwarf lemon tree that produces the biggest, juiciest lemons you've ever seen in your life. And I'm so excited to see that. Can you imagine how Hashem felt when he was seeing the sprout come out of the ground during the times of the Egyptian struggle? And it was during this Egyptian struggle that they were buried in the sand of struggle. And when that little blossom popped out and began to holler and scream out and cry out for deliverance to be taken out of Egypt, how happy it was for Hashem to bring them to Mount Sinai and give them his Torah, and then for that to blossom into a beautiful mature tree. And that's why he told them that they were a holy nation and a royal priesthood. At this time, God also gave the nations a last chance. And his mercy, he had suspended their final judgment until the time that the Torah was given with the revelation of Sinai. He then offered the Torah to every nation, giving them the opportunity to accept it. And do we all understand how that was accomplished? How was all the nations informed? There's nothing written in the Torah that said that all the nations came to Sinai. So how did they see it or hear the Torah? Do y'all remember? What does the sages say? No? No volunteers? Whenever God at Sinai spoke, or when he spoke, he didn't have a vocal cords, but what was transmitted was the very image of the Torah in vibrating tones. They said they saw the Torah written in the air, in the firmament. It was written in the sand. And we all know that sound waves can make patterns in the sand. You're familiar with this. And it's interesting because they've done some research in which they've taken Hebrew letters and they have spoken them, and the spoken Hebrew letters make the same formation in sand. I don't know if you know that. Just go take a look. You can see it on YouTube. Very easy, easy video to pull up. Do what?
Rabbi Cohen has it in his book.
Rabbi Cohen, yeah, yes. Rabbi Zamir Cohen.
Zamir Cohen.
Rabbi Zamir Cohen of the Coming Revolution actually has in the book and has pictures of the Hebrew letters that are formed. I think we have the book over here. Excellent. Thank you. Thanks. This is a fantastic book. How many's ever read this? This is one of the first books that I ever got. When I saw this, it helped me to remember and know that for sure the Torah is divine. Why? Because it's scientifically, it's proven scientifically. With that being said, every human being that lived on the planet saw the Torah with their own eyes. It scared everybody to death, but it was the Jewish people that said, we'll do it, but just have Moshe tell us. Because we're scared the voice will destroy us. I mean, it's so powerful. The rest of the nations went, whoop, don't want to have anything to do with this. If this God is that powerful, then that Torah that he's speaking will destroy us. If any nation would have accepted the Torah, it would have elevated itself from its lower state. As was, none of them desired the Torah. The judgment was therefore sealed completely. The gates was permanently closed and never again to be opened. Now, what does it mean? It doesn't mean that individuals can't obviously elevate themselves from the nation, because that's what the Ramchal said at the beginning. Each individual can prune its branch off the tree and attach yourself to Judaism. And there are people within the nations, when it says that they were doomed, it doesn't mean that they're all going to hell, okay? That's not a concept that's taught and understood here. What it means is they're doomed to stay at that lower state. They can only reach a certain level of spiritual connection and understanding because they will be stuck at that state. And doesn't mean that they won't have a place in the world to come, because it's obvious that Hashem says that all souls belong to me. He didn't say just Jewish souls, all souls belong to me. And if that's the case, that means that every soul that lives righteously before God and treats their neighbor properly and treats everyone with justice, and they don't rob and steal and murder, they will have a place in the world to come. But they are at the lower level. Now, what happens to the non-Jew who comes close to Torah and takes and receives the great wisdom of Torah, takes on the Shavah mitzvot, the 7 mitzvahs that were given to Noah, and believes that there is only one God, and that God has a people that he gave them the Torah? That person who lives that life at the most high level of discipline and musar, ethics, and Torah wisdom is considered like a Hakohen Gadol. They're considered a Tzaddik in the nations. It's amazing. Why? Because they've taken themselves from that lower level up to a super high level that God didn't even expect them to do. He expected them. This is how you are. I created you this way. This is what you are to be. They will be judged on the way and what they were created to do. It still remained possible, however, for an individual to convert to Judaism. In this manner, he could still include himself in Abraham's tree by his own free will. When you hear someone that's converted, they'll say, I'm a Jew by what? By choice. I'm a Jew by choice. The decree, however, is not that the other nations should be destroyed. It is only meant that they would have to remain at this lower level. As I said before, the lower state would never have been meant for man if Adam had not sinned. It only came to being in the first place as a result of Adam's sin. The nations still have the human aspect, blemished though it may be, and God's desire is that they should at least have a counterpart of what is actually appropriate for all mankind. Therefore, why the Jewish people were chosen. They were not chosen because they were that special. They were chosen because God made a covenant with Abraham. Someone asked me the other day, what was the covenant then that Moshe was talking about in this Torah portion? What's this covenant? What about the Sinai covenant? And I said, we've got to remember the covenant that Abraham made with Hashem was about the land. Do you realize that? It was about the land. And the covenant was made, Hashem made it with himself. Even though he included Abraham, he made it with himself. Therefore, no one can break that covenant. No one. Now, Israel could have easily, in which they did, sin, and because of the covenant with the land, when they sinned, they were booted out. And when they returned back to the land, it was because that they had brought God back in the center of their life. Therefore, That is why we have a nation of Israel today. And someone would argue that Judaism lacks a lot of spirituality, not Judaism, but the Israelis. They have gay pride just like they have here. They have, just going through the whole list. But obviously have merited something because God had that place shut up for several hundred years, and no Jews were allowed to live in it with a state and a nation as a Jewish state. Now, He therefore granted them divine souls. Who? That is the people of the nation. Somewhat like that of a Jew, even though it was on a much lower level. They were likewise given commandments through which they could attain both material and spiritual advantages appropriate to their nature. These are the 7 universal commandments given to the children of Noah. God doesn't expect the same thing of the people of the nations with lower level of responsibility than what He would a Jew. To be honest with you, I will speak to Jewish people, those who are possibly off the derrick. I'm very concerned for you because Hashem is not going to cut you any slack. He's not going to cut you any slack if you're not doing what you're supposed to do. And my encouragement is to get back on the derrick, get back on the path, follow righteousness, fall in love with Hashem, talk to Hashem, begin to develop halakha in your life, and change your ways, because I'm very concerned. Because if you're acting like a Gentile, you're going to be still judged like a Jew. And that's very important. Now that I've laid that heavy load, I think it's important. Why do I say that? Because my Jewish brothers and sisters, there are many thousands of them out there that are still running around like in the day of Noah, eating and drinking and being merry and in pleasure and not thinking one thing about walking with God. So I want to encourage you. It says this: all this had been arranged from the beginning of creation, prepared for the contingency that man would sin. In this respect, it is like other harmful things in punishment, which are also created conditionally, as our sages have taught us. And it says, in the world to come, however, there will be no nation other than Israel. The souls of the righteous Gentiles will be allowed to exist in the future world, but only as an addition and attachment to Israel. Meaning that the only people that will exist with the nation of Israel is those people who are righteous in the nations, and they have belief in one God, and they believe in the Torah. They will therefore be a secondary to the Jew, and a garment is secondary to the one who wears it. They will be a part of each other, but they will be different. All that they attain of is ultimate good will have to be attained in this manner, since by virtue of their nature they can only receive no more. It says, when the world, this is paragraph 8, it says, when the world was divided into 70 nations, God appointed these 70 direct angels as officers, or sharim, in charge of these nations, to watch them and to attend to their needs. Thus, God does not oversee the nations except in a general manner. It is each one's directing angel who takes care of the details through the power that God gives it for the purpose of God's holding Israel. Amos 3:2, it says, only you have I known among the families of the earth. What is he saying? God directly manages Israel and the Jewish people. He doesn't directly manage the nations this way. Angels manage the nations for Hashem. And I would also add that the righteous non-Jew who takes upon themselves Torah and mitzvah and loves Hashem as a non-Jew, also Hashem is managing you because you are part of His people, though it's indirectly. This does not mean, however, that the details are withheld from God's knowledge. This cannot be true, since everything and all of creation is perceived and understood by God and is revealed to Him. What it does mean, however, is that God does not oversee, directly influence their details. This will be further clarified in another section. We're going to go through 9, and we will conclude in this section. We'll go to chapter 5 next week. God thus made the reflections and elevations of all creation totally dependent on the Jews. To the extent that this can be expressed, we can thus say that He subjugated His providence to them. Through their deeds, they can cause His light to shine forth and have influence, or on the other hand, hold it back and conceal it. The deeds of other nations, on the other hand, do not add or subtract from the state of creation, nor do they cause God to reveal Himself or withdraw Himself. All they can do is bring about their own gain and loss and strengthen and weaken their own by their own direction. So what does he say? Israel, all of the world is dependent on what the Jewish people do. Entirely on what they do. If they were to stop doing mitzvah and davening, what do you think would happen in the world? It would cease to exist, because Torah is not dependent on what the nations do. If the nations don't, whatever they do, they're doing their bid to take care of themselves. Their economies rise and fall. They go to war. They conquer land. They build houses. They build kingdoms. That's all on them. They're supervised by the angel of God. If God needs to bring judgment to them, He brings judgment by the angel. If He comes to bring blessing to them because of something they've done, for example, the United States of America has mainly prospered because of its protection of the Jewish people, even though they have not had 100% track record. It's been spotty, because we do remember in the Second World War, of course I don't, but Tom probably does, but in the Second World War, what happened? They refused, huh? You were 6 years old. I'm just giving you a hard time. Second World War, they refused ships, loads of Jewish immigrants that were trying to run from the Holocaust. Refused to have them. Sent them out in the coast. Many of them died. We don't have the best record, but I can tell you what's better than a lot of the other nations, and we've reaped the great benefit of taking care of the Jewish people. Regardless what every president has said, to include our current president, who has publicly denounced Israel in many aspects, continue to privately support the nation of Israel with trillions of dollars. Matter of fact, the newest military contract, or what do you call it, aid package to Israel is the biggest in history and the biggest of any nation in the world. So, it's fine. If you want to publicly denounce Israel, fine. But thank God they're supporting them, and we're receiving the great benefit from it. Let's go on. He says, although God does not involve Himself expressly in the direction of the nations in detail, it is possible that He should exercise His providence over them when it is required for the sake of, Israel. So if a nation wants to be blessed, what do? They bless Israel. Now we're finding out China has figured this little secret out. And they're one of the greatest trading partners with Israel right now, technology, etc. They're seeing the great benefit of trading with Israel. Now we have countries that would have never thought twice. And it's funny, because there are countries that are publicly denouncing Israel but have private channel connections in which they're receiving technology, agriculture, science, you name it, but publicly it's like, oh, you're the bad guy, but at the bottom, like, I'm just having to do this because this is what I'm expected to do. It says, His providence over them when it is required for the sake of Israel. This may be because of a single Jew or a number of them. Such the case, however, falls under the category of means discussed in a previous chapter. What do we learn? We learn this, that the Creator of the universe made this beautiful creation with such precision and balance, and He put all of the humans on this earth, and He set them on course to go from the beginnings, from Adam all the way forward, to grow up into this huge family tree. Many, many family trees. I have one, you have a family tree. Some of us have half a tree. No, I'm just picking. Some is just one big root, just picking. But we all have our family trees, okay? But the beautiful thing is that Israel, the Jewish people, have been given the responsibility to be, follow me, the tree of life. They're the tree in the middle of the garden that Hashem says, there, if you go there, you'll have life. Now don't eat of that tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Sometimes I wonder if the nations aren't the example of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We're at a lowest level. We have a lot of knowledge about stuff, but stuff that we really shouldn't know about. So that concludes the Shur, and we'll go into chapter 5 next week, in the way of God.
As we all know, the foundation of Judaism is our Bible, the Tanakh. But truth be told, the real foundation are the Chamishei Chumshei Torah, the 5 books of Moses. Because all of the other books of the Bible, after the 5 books of Moses, are basically only there to reinforce the 5 books of Moses. There were not any new laws, any new instructions that were given by God to the Jewish people after the 5 books of Moses. Not one prophet really is teaching us anything new. The prophets were basically there to scold us when we weren't living up to the teachings in the 5 books of Moses. So the epicenter, the core of our faith, of Judaism, is found in the revelation that was given to God, by God to Moses at Mount Sinai. Now, this revelation, this foundation of Judaism, is so solid, it is so solid that both Christianity and Islam base themselves upon the revelation of God at Mount Sinai. They don't question it, they accept it as a historical verity, and they simply say that either there was more to come. Islam questions whether or not the Jews accurately preserved what was revealed by God previously. But both of these major, what are often called daughter religions to Judaism, accept unflinchingly and unreservedly the truth of the revelation of the Torah at Mount Sinai by God to Moses. Now, there is something unique about this revelation at Mount Sinai. Very unique among all religions in the world. Every single other religion basically begins with an individual who claims to have had a revelation from God. Doesn't make much sense to start a religion and claim you just made it up all by yourself. So every religion, if they have any brains, are going to try to give some strength to the claim that their religion is true. And so that strength is the claim that this religion comes from God. We received it from God. But it's always an individual who claims that they received a revelation. Muhammad claims that the revelation came through the prophet, through the angel Gabriel. So that's the claim of Islam. It wasn't even directly from God, but that the angel Gabriel was the one that revealed the Quran to Muhammad. And in Christianity, basically the claim is that the authors of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, as well as the other writers in the Christian scriptures, mainly the Apostle Paul, that they didn't just make up these writings. The claim is that these were inspired, revealed by God, and that these writings have the authority of divine revelation. Judaism is not based upon the claim that Moses simply claimed that God spoke to him at Mount Sinai. That is not the narrative. The storyline is not that Moses comes down from the mountain and claims that God spoke to him. In the 19th chapter of the book of Exodus, verse 9, God says to Moses the following, "Behold, I come to you in the thickness of the cloud, so that the people will hear as I speak to you, and they will also believe in you forever." So the important difference between the foundation of Judaism and every other religion is that every other religion is built upon a private revelation, where the originators, the founders of those religions, make the claim that God spoke to them. And basically it's take it or leave it. Judaism is based upon the claim, the story, that God spoke to Moses in the presence, in the hearing of the 3 million people who came out of Egypt with Moses. We're told there were about 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60, and if you do your extrapolations, it amounts to approximately 3 million people. It's very difficult, it's impossible, to fabricate a public revelation. You can't fabricate a public event. Because hundreds of years later, people would be reading in the Bible that God spoke to your ancestors at Mount Sinai. Now, if it happened that God spoke to people at Mount Sinai, that's a pretty amazing event. It's a pretty incredible experience. And you could rest assured that people would tell that to their children. If their children were not old enough, or their children weren't born yet, they would say, listen, I did a lot of cool things in my lifetime. But if you want to know the most amazing thing that happened to me, it's when we stood at Mount Sinai and heard God speak to Moses. And there were 3 million of us. It was amazing, incredible. Now, if this did not happen, if God did not speak to Moses and every single other person there heard it, and then Moses just writes it down, that God spoke to me in the hearing of all of you people, so a generation or 2 or 3 or 4 later, people would read these accounts, and it would say that every single person at Mount Sinai heard God speak, and the reader would say, really? My parents never told me that. So if it did not happen, people would not accept the text as it exists. The fact that we never had in the history of Judaism, we've had people who questioned rabbinic authority, people who questioned the oral Torah. We never had in Judaism a movement of people that questioned the revelation at Sinai. No one ever said in Jewish history, until maybe 200 years ago, we went for over 3,000 years where no one questioned the event of the revelation, the public revelation at Mount Sinai. And this is repeated many times, and God goes on to say in the book of Deuteronomy that no nation will ever claim that they received a public revelation. God says specifically, this is a unique experience in world history, and no one else is going to make the claim that they received a public revelation because it cannot be fabricated. And so the rock-solid foundation of Judaism is the public revelation to the entire Jewish people at Mount Sinai.